some things like that. What got you ready? Okay, I'm ready. Today is August the 31st, 1996. We're in McLean, Virginia at the Hilton Hotel at the 50th reunion of the 12th Armored Division. I'm interviewing Ernest H. Wallander. I appreciate you letting us come today and visit with you. First of all, I'm going to ask you to give me your full name, where you were born, and the date of your birth.
My full name is Ernest Hines Wallander. I was born the 14th of August, 1924, in Mount Vernon, New York.
Okay. Tell me about your mother and her family and her maiden name.
Her maiden name was Meta Margaretha Hines. Her parents had died at the time. By the time she was 8 years old, she was an orphan. And she was, at that time they didn't adopt them, but the court awarded her and her brother, my uncle, to an aunt and uncle, a sister and brother-in-law of her mother. And she was raised in Mount Vernon, New York as well at that time. During the war, she was very interested in social work. And she had done social work in New York City before she was married. And then during the war, she did gray lady work or did work at one of the hospitals in the town we lived in for at least 3 or 4 years.
And what about your dad?
My father had also come from Mount Vernon, New York. He had been, let me see, I don't, you're challenging my memory now. He'd had several positions, including a business of his own that he had. And then at the time of the Depression, 1929, 1930, the family suffered some severe financial reverses, and we had to move from our home in Connecticut to Pennsylvania. He was employed on and off at that from then on. I'll just put it that way. It's the easiest way to put it. I can think of.
Okay. If you were to think about your parents, what are the things that they passed on to you, gave to you, that makes you who you are today?
My father was a very, what should I call him? I want to say simple, but that's not necessarily the characterization I'm looking for. He was a very gentle man. The family was a matriarchy. My mother, while she didn't overtly control the family, I think she controlled what was done. The primary decisions were made by her. And he was mostly concerned about earning a living and trying to provide for the family as best he could. Unfortunately, he did not have an academic background, and he was not well-versed in any particular kind of business or activity, and he had to take a variety of jobs in order to do what he had to do at that point. As I said, my mother was always interested in social work. She did work. They both worked very hard in establishing and maintaining several new churches that our denomination started, one in New York, several in Pennsylvania, one in New Jersey. They were charter members of another number of new congregations that had been started. They were very active in youth work, were leaders of the youth program where we lived when I was in high school. And generally that was the tone of the family. We attended church every Sunday, twice on Sunday sometimes, if there was an evening service. During Lent, every Wednesday night, and that kind of background. My father was from a Swedish background, my mother was German. I'll add that parenthetically at this point.
Okay. Would you mind telling me which Protestant group they were?
Yeah, we were Lutherans.
Lutherans, okay, I was wondering.
In fact, we suspect my mother's family was probably the second and third converts that Martin Luther ever made, because they were so hidebound Lutheran.
Okay. Okay. So your growing up was very religious-oriented Lutheran church.
Yes, and very circumscribed. My social life revolved around the church, Luther League and things like that. High school, I was not very active. I did get into drama. Several times I was in plays, but I wasn't in football, I wasn't in baseball, I wasn't in basketball, I wasn't athletically inclined in any way. I was inclined to be a little chubby, and I think that helped keep me from doing too many active things like that.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I have a sister who's still living, and I had a brother who passed away when he was 8 days old.
Okay. Can you tell me her name? Where
Her
she
name
lives?
is Mita. Oh yes, Mita Alva Wallander Sutton, and she lives in New Jersey at the moment. She's 60. She's 66. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So in high school, you were active drama. What year did you graduate from high school?
I graduated from high school in June of 1942.
Okay. Tell me about the day that you realized or knew that Army was facing you. Okay, I tell you what, get me from high school to Camp Barkley.
Up to Camp Barkley. Oh my, that'll take a while.
See, I leave
All right, I
it
graduated in June of 42, and since I had been enrolled, I wasn't 18 yet. I wasn't 18 till August. I was enrolled at Muhlenberg College, accepted to go to college in the fall, and I took I took a job at one of the hotels up in the Poconos as a waiter, which was a very interesting job. Anyway, that ended in September. Then I went to college. I started college in the fall. And we were advised, let me say, by the dean of freshmen that we should register with his draft board in Allentown, since he was a member of the draft board, and he was attempting to keep at least some of us freshmen from not having to go immediately. He wanted us to finish our freshman year. That's what his purpose was. And he felt he could do that.
Give me his name. What was his name?
His name was Harry Benfer.
Okay.
My gosh, I even remember that.
Okay.
His nickname was Haps, and he was a sort of an icon on the college campus. Things didn't quite work out that way. We found out probably in December or January, early January, that Haps did not have as much influence as he thought he had, and we were facing some kind of a rendezvous, I'll call it, with the service. I attempted to get into the Navy because there was a V-12 and a V-9 or V-6 program at Muhlenberg, but because of my eyes and other physical problems I had, the Navy rejected me. Since it was, as I was advised, a tradition in my family that no males were ever, quote, drafted, unquote, I enlisted in the enlisted reserve corps of the Army.
So you do have a military history in your family?
Well, only because my uncle enlisted in the First World War. He was killed in the First World War. And my father enlisted for the First World War. They're the only two that...
Oh, okay. But that was kind of a family tradition.
Well, for the two, yeah, for that generation,
yeah.
For that generation. So obviously my generation had to do the same thing. Although, as it turned out, it was the best thing I could have done, because I discovered after I was in the service that having the serial number I had protected me from having a number of very onerous jobs, or stopped me from not getting them, I should say, because my serial number started with a 1, and all the draftees started with a 3. And the first sergeant and the sergeants, who were usually regular Army men, seemed to have more of a feeling for those of us who had enlisted than they had for those who had been drafted, which in one way I guess is understandable. But anyway, I know there were a number of things that were run by roster, and when your name came up, you did it. Well, I know somehow, some way, my name passed over some of those onerous jobs, and I didn't have to do them. And my only assumption could be, and I looked around also, I saw the others who had a 1 in their serial number in that particular unit were excused from some of those jobs. Well, I was finally called to active duty in March of 1943. And let me see, I went to Fort Meade to be inducted. I went then from Fort Meade, I went to Camp Wallace in Texas. It was down near Galveston. I assume it's gone now. And I took my basic training in anti-aircraft. We were doing pretty well until we finally shot down one of the planes that was pulling one of the targets for it. But that sort of stopped the Army from the Air Corps from wanting to fly for us anymore, as we were doing some target shooting on the bay down at Galveston. I finished my basic training in anti-aircraft. At that point, it was, let me see, that would have been May of 44, I think. No, May of 43. I became aware of the ASTP program. Primarily through an article in the New York Times that my mother sent me saying, you know, do you want to try for this? I then talked with the commanding officer of my company and found out that, yes, I could be considered for that program, but also I could be considered for OCS. And he gave me a day or two and asked me to make a decision as to which I wanted to go to. He made no inference or effort to tell me which one. He just said, you have a choice. So I chose the ASTP program and went to it was called a STAR unit. It was simply a unit that classified you. At that point, I think there was a language ASTP, and there was the engineering ASTP was the biggest one. I got classified in the engineering group, basic engineering group, and was sent to College Station, Texas, to Texas A&M. I stayed there for the duration of the time that the program was in operation, until I guess March of 44. And then at that point was one of over 1,000 who got shipped out into 12th Armored Division. Initially, I was assigned to the 92nd Recon Battalion, but through some mysterious way, I'll never know how, they reclassified me and sent me to the 17th Armored Infantry Battalion, the A Company. And there I stayed the rest of my Army time.
Okay.
Is that detailed enough for you? I really can't give you much more.
No, that's great. Okay, you came into Camp Barkley. You came with a group from A&M?
No, I came with a group from the STAR program, but a lot of us were from the Army, from A&M, yeah.
Okay. Tell me about coming into Abilene and your first impression of Abilene and Camp Barkley.
Oh, my heavens. Oh, good Lord. What was my first impression? When I arrived at Camp Barkley, the company was out on a problem, an overnight problem. And I was the only one in the company area for about 2 or 3 days. Myself and the first sergeant, and maybe the mess sergeant. Somehow I got fed, I don't know how. But anyway, I had the hutment all to myself there, and I just laid around and read and sort of cleaned up the equipment and got myself, drew the equipment I needed, and got organized and everything. So my introduction to Barkley was really rather uneventful, I would say. The company came back, I was there, and that was it. You know, it didn't seem to matter. I don't recall that there were, at that moment, or that day, that there were any more who had been assigned to A Company who were there. They were coming in, but I don't remember any other ones being assigned the same day I had been, because I had been at the 92nd earlier. And I think the other ones who came in from ASTP had been assigned at the same time I'd been assigned to 92nd, and then they didn't get transferred like I did into the infantry. Abilene, good Lord. I don't remember having any particular feeling about Abilene, to be perfectly frank with you.
Or impression?
No impression. I do know that, you know, if I got terribly bored on Saturday, I'd go into Abilene and sit and watch 4 or 5 movies at a time, or, you know, string them out and all this. Theaters. I do remember that in August of that year, at about my birthday, a letter arrived from a lady in Abilene telling me that if I would call her or get in contact with her, my father had ordered a birthday cake for me through her, and that I was to get in contact with her and come to Abilene to get the birthday cake at my convenience. So we arranged then that I would come and get the birthday cake. Abilene had no great restaurants that I recall, no place to really eat. Nothing like the Hotel Galvez in Galveston, which had excellent shrimp. And I guess, you know, it was just typical Army, but
when you think about Camp Barkley, who is the first person in your company that comes to your mind?
First sergeant.
And who is that?
That
Tell
was
me about
Jesse
him.
Rhine. Jesse was I thought he was a regular Army, but I found out later he wasn't. He also did not live too far away from where I lived. He was a Pennsylvanian. Jesse was very fair, but very stern. I think also that one thing you have to remember, A Company received, I believe, one of the highest number of ASCP students that any company in the 12th Armored Division had taken. Whether we were considered to be, quote, elite or unquote, I don't know. But I do know that the feeling among the officers, and I assume also about the first sergeant, was that this was a group that was unique. We were not, standard inductees. We had this college education background and everything. And whether we were going to turn out to be a problem or not, or a group of, pardon the expression, ladies, quote, smart asses, unquote, they didn't know at that point. And it took a while for us all to get to know one another, let me put it that way. Also, I was very impressed with the company commander, Carl Helton. He was very young. I've only recently found out more about his background. I know he came from Kentucky. After the war, and through the association, we became friends, I will say. Obviously, during the Army, we were an officer and enlisted personnel relationship. But I worked with him quite closely because later on in my Army career, I was assigned to the company navigator because I had taken courses in map reading and things like that in my geology courses at college, and I probably was the only one who could orient a map for them and could read some of the symbols and so forth. But anyway, he and I then, until Herlesheim, when he was captured and I was not, I was pretty well constantly with him, particularly during combat. After we got into combat, I was there with him all the time, but prior to that I was with him frequently, let me put it that way.
I have heard that he was sort of cocky. You would have a closer relationship.
No, I wouldn't call him cocky as I would call him self-confident.
Oh. Okay, tell me what it was like watching this. He was 22?
About that, yeah.
About 22?
Yeah, 22, yeah.
Tell me your observations of how he led, how he got a whole bunch of new ASTP guys where we didn't know what they were going to be.
Right.
Yeah. Tell me, do you have any observations or about that?
I think he went by the book with us. He was not going to allow any, quote, favoritism or unquote to be shown. The Army has its own special way of doing things, and that was the way we were going to do them, and that was the way he was going to do them. And I think it was probably the right way at that point, because you forget, we had been at college for 8 or 9 months. We were not exactly conversant with the field manuals and how to do all the manual of arms and everything, or marching and so forth. And some of that had to be reinstilled in us, let's put it that way. And also, none of us had ever been in the field. We were all, as far as any combat experience, we'd had none. We'd had no preparation for that. At least I hadn't, because I'd been in anti-aircraft. And my field experience consisted of going out on the beach at Galveston and playing around with a Bofors 40 shooting at a target instead of the airplane. So they had to turn us into infantrymen, is what I'm saying, because not many of us had come from that. And I think he did, considering all things considered, let me put it that way. I think that Captain Hilton did a splendid job and should be very well commended for what he did. I'm not sure I would have said that while I was there, but looking back after 50 years, I think he took the right approach. And there may have been other approaches that would have been equally correct, but nevertheless, the one he chose was satisfactory. And as far as I'm concerned, now I'm sure there are others who don't consider that to be so, but as I said, I was probably as close to him as any enlisted man was, not emotionally, but at least physically, and could observe him.
If you were to look at the group of ASTP men, could you label, can you put a word to what they were like as a group? Was it okay that they came in and they were in college and all of a sudden they're in the infantry? Or can you make some observations about that?
Some were bitter, put it that way. But they had been bitter because they were in the service. It wasn't necessarily because they'd been ASDP and were put into the infantry. They'd been bitter wherever they went. It wasn't just coming into the 12th Armored Division. Some accepted it very stoically and said, this is it, follow orders, and away we go. That's it. And that was sort of my attitude. I decided very early on that if I buck the program, I learned very quickly, it will kill me before I'll kill it. And that the easiest way to get through this period was to obey orders and keep my head down, and also my fanny, and not make waves. Don't volunteer for anything. That was a typical Army motto. And for me, it worked very well. I did have, because of my position with company headquarters, I did have a unique role that the platoon people, the men in the platoons, did not have. For example, I was reading a book today, just finished reading a book called The Other Battle of the Bulge, which commented about how terrifically terrible the winter of 1944-45 was in Europe, particularly down in the area where we were, with snow 3 or 4 feet high and 20 below zero temperature, and the wind coming in from the Siberian plains and everything. And I said to my wife as I was reading that, I said, I do not remember a thing about the weather. The weather did not make an impression on me whatsoever. And yet I'm reading and hearing from other men about how terrible the weather was. And I tried to figure out why, and I came to the conclusion that the weather didn't bother me as much because company headquarters personnel did not, quote, live in the field. If we could, we found an inn or a guest house or a house, and you could always kick the civilians out and take it over if you wanted to, if you had to. So that at night, we were protected to an extent. The only 2 or 3 nights I remember being in the field and digging a foxhole were at Herlesheim on 16th, 17th, and 18th of January. Other than that, most of my time was spent at night anyway, which would have been the most horrible part of the time, in shelter. And I wasn't out in a foxhole either digging one or living in a pup tent or anything like that. And that's the only reason I can figure out that the weather didn't play as much of a part in my remembrances as it did in everybody else's, or what I've read. So that may sound odd, but nevertheless, we certainly drove in it, and I was out in it constantly during the day. But at night, except for those 2 or 3 nights, I don't remember being out there. So that sounds, I sort of led I don't want to call it a sheltered life, but at least more protected from the elements than other men did.
If you were to look at your A company, whether it was Barclay, you can tell me if it's Barclay or later on, who was the person that always was keeping things loose, light, jokester, lighthearted? Was there anybody who took that?
None that I can remember.
Okay. Anybody really serious, sort of, kind of serious?
Well, I guess once we realized we were going to combat, we all became rather serious, but I can't remember, or recall, I guess would be the right word. I can't recall any person I could characterize in that fashion at this point.
Okay. How would you perceive the camaraderie at the point of Barclay and then the point of battle? You can compare and contrast that.
Well, I think the group of A Company men who had started the company, come over from the 56th Regiment and gone through Campbell and gone through Tennessee maneuvers, was a rather close-knit group. They'd all been through the same experience and they'd done all that. We came along as newcomers, let me say. And I'm really not sure that everybody was as well accepted, I'll say, was well accepted until after combat, when we sort of had to prove ourselves. That, yeah, hey, we can shoot, we can die just as well as you can. And I think that loosened things up. Of course, after Herlesheim, so many of the old group were gone, and a whole totally new group kept coming in, and we were losing men and new groups. Once that turnover started, then it was very difficult to establish any kind of camaraderie or anything. You were afraid to come too close to anybody because, as I said to somebody today or yesterday, I said at 10 o'clock in the morning you get a replacement, by noon he could be dead. So you were careful about what you did with your emotions because you couldn't afford to continue to have them bared by some of the things that happened. And I don't know if you want me to go into some of those, but I can tell you that I went back to Herlesheim after they had been recaptured and saw many of the men whom I knew and had trained with still lying there. They had not been buried. They were still lying on the snow, frozen. I also have seen half-tracks blown apart and helped to collect pieces of bodies. Those kinds of things, I think, tend to restrict you from getting too emotionally involved because, as I said, you spend your emotions. And they're just so much and no more. And it tended to make me, I think, much more reserved. As time went on, new people came in. I did not make any efforts to become overly friendly with them, let me put it that way. Now, the group that stayed was still there. That was different. You know, we'd already been through, those of us who went through Herlisheim, I think, had an experience that only one who's gone through it can understand. You don't even have to, you don't have to talk about it because it's there and you know what you went through. I don't know if that's the kind of answer you're looking for or not,
yes.
but...
That's very good, yeah. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Is there anything that stands out for you between Camp Barclay, Camp Shanks, through Tidworth? You have any memories that would really stand out, or was it just kind of getting on the trains and going? Well,
here in the States it was. I remember being quite ill, seasick going over on the boat and living on candy bars. The English food was horrible. I didn't eat any of it. I fortunately brought along several cartons of chocolate bars, and I lived on those on the time over. We were at Tidworth, as you mentioned. I did get down to Stonehenge, and I found that, to me, I'm a historian. I like to visit places like that. And I got to Stonehenge. I got to some summer residence of the Duke of Marlborough, and then I got into London for 2 or 3 days, which was really the high point to me of being in England, because we weren't there that long. We had landed in Liverpool, come down to the Salisbury Plain, and there wasn't that much sightseeing to be done. And what I did see around Tidworth, I did on Saturdays or Sundays. There were 3 or 4 of us who got together and who went around together. So that was, England is sort of a blur as far as time there was concerned. It wasn't that long. And suddenly we were crossing the Channel and into France.
The day before y'all, or when you realized that you're going to be leaving England, maybe tomorrow, next day, whenever it was, like you got your orders that it's time to go, what was your feelings then at that point? Do you remember, or was it?
No, I don't. No. They were not that pro or con one way or the other. It was just still part of the job. Mm-hmm. It was certainly anticipated. We knew we were going. Our equipment was already, some of our equipment was already in France. It was not a surprise that we were going to France. And I guess the timing was just, it was a matter of when headquarters wanted to send us there. We had no control over it, so we sort of waited there until time came to go.
Was the Channel ride over very eventful, or just kind of?
No, I don't remember the Channel ride being eventful. I do recall getting out of disembarking from the boat being very eventful, because we had to climb down nets and then jump into the landing craft. And with the waves going up and down, the boat going this way and the landing craft going that way, and you had to time this so you didn't, and you had a full field pack on and a rifle and a buffalo bag and everything. And I do recall getting off the boat being quite a difficult experience, even though we were physically fit and everything. It was still a lot of equipment that we were trying to manipulate at one time. I do remember that it was a very nasty night. We got to land, and it was raining. And we were hustled into trucks and taken off somewhere out of town somewhere into a marshy, wet field where we put up our tents and tried to get some rest.
And that was your welcome to your...
That was my welcome to France, yes. That was my welcome to France.
Okay, tell me about the first, kind of just narrate for me from there until just the brink of Herlisheim.
Okay, let's see, that was it must have been the end of October that we landed. I came over from England. I'm trying to get this in chronological period. From the field that we were in, we went to the property of a chateau, the Chateau de Beausoleil, which had some long tunnels in it, which we were told, had been used for the V rockets that the Germans were sending over. They did make excellent shelter, however. And we knocked together some bunks, and we found some straw, and we lived there through Thanksgiving, I recall. Thanksgiving dinner was cooked there. It wasn't until early December that we moved out. I believe the first place we went to was Loonville, where we rendezvoused at I remember being in this large school at Loonville with the battalion, and we stayed there overnight. And then we moved on to behind the lines at, I believe it would have been at Bitch, or Binding, I'm not sure which. If I could look at my book, I could tell you precisely. I guess it was Binding Barracks was where we went next, yeah. And that was where we were committed. We went into the line there. I do recall that we did some reconnoitering before we relieved the unit that was there with the company commander. I do recall that probably a day after we took over, that night we were ordered to make and that happened afterwards. Let me see, I'm trying to think of the chronological order here. There were mines there, I recall, and there were a lot of the civilians had taken refuge in the mines there. And I remember going into one of them, down a long, steep grade. There was a staircase going down. And the odor of the carbide lamp was one thing that stuck in my mind from having gone down there. I recall making a night attack along a railroad track with phosphorus shells being fired by our own artillery along a line about maybe 100 yards beyond where we were. It was sort of I guess, a guide for us that we were supposed to follow if we could. I recall the company commander trying to rouse a form he found up near the railroad tracks, only to find that it was a dead body and not actually one we could resuscitate at that time. But it was dark, you couldn't tell, and he was trying very hard to get this person to join us. It might have been a dead German. Again, we couldn't tell what it was. We knew it was a body. I'm trying to remember the name of the town we were going after. But it was another town beyond the barracks there that we took. We did take it. It was successfully taken. And I think we took 2 or 3 other small towns in that area, as I recall, during December. December didn't seem too eventful to me, as I remember December. I think maybe a lot of December and early January was blotted out by Herlesheim. Herlesheim blotted a lot of activity out because nothing had really... I didn't think anything startling had happened before Herlesheim. And I'm not sure anything startling happened after Herlesheim either, because that was the high point, certainly, of anybody who was in the division or in my company. I do recall getting the instructions to move to Weyerheim, which was the town behind Herlesheim, where we rendezvoused with the tanks. I do recall making some contact, going out into the field in front of, between Weyerheim and Herlesheim, just to look over what it looked like and everything. But here again, I don't remember whether it was snow covered. I don't remember anything about it at all. I do remember the first attack we made in the morning of the first day, that we were moving down the street or a road that led from Weyerheim to Herlesheim on the right flank. And there was a house, a big white house there. And I was surprised when I saw some films that Mr. Hack brought back. That house is still there, believe it or not. I remember the tanks coming up, and I remember our efforts to get across the river, pardon me for a moment here, being blocked because there were no bridges. And the company commander and several of the other officers and myself sat on the bank of the river, the Zorn, I believe it was, while the engineers came up and attempted to put a Bailey bridge across the Zorn. There were also canals there, and it was a not particularly good tank country because of the rivers and the tank and those obstacles. I assume the bridge got built because the tanks got across. The infantry then came across as well. But then as we got closer to Herlesheim, the tanks drew a tremendous amount of fire from the Steinwald Woods, which is over on our right. We had been told that Steinwald Woods would be cleared by the French. That was our understanding in A Company, that the French were going to clear Steinwald Woods, and we didn't have to worry about them. That, unfortunately, did not happen, and we sustained got a lot of fire, particularly 88 fire. Most of the tanks were hit, and it ended up with just merely an infantry attack because we lost all the tanks. And at the end of the first day, we still had not achieved Herlesheim. I believe maybe the advanced elements were up on the railroad tracks and on the outskirts of Herlesheim, but we didn't get into the town that I recall because we pulled back somewhat, set up a perimeter defense. It was one of the few nights I remember being out in the cold and digging a foxhole, chipping away like everybody else was. At that point, I was instructed by the company commander to come with him back to battalion. And that was a trip trying to figure out how to get back to battalion in the dead of night in the middle of a field that nobody knew which way was which. But we did get back there. We found it. And I didn't go into the conference, but I stayed outside. He went in and got his orders and came out, and we proceeded to go back to the company. And we found it. The next morning, we had been ordered then to make another attack, and with B Company on, I believe B Company was on the right, and A Company was on the left, and we were to attack Herlesheim from, I'll say, the south. This was the end towards Strasbourg. We succeeded in getting partly into the town. We did not get all the way into the town. We may have seen some elements. One or two men may have gotten up to the square. I don't recall. But I know it was a rather hectic day. And both companies did not make very good progress, I'll say that, at that point. A command post was set up in the basement of one of the houses in Herlesheim. And to that command post came Major Logan, the battalion commander, several of the battalion officers, several of the two company commanders, Captain Helton and Lieutenant Muska. The first sergeant, our first sergeant came up. Why, I'll never know. There were efforts to resupply us with food and ammunition and so forth.
Who was your first sergeant?
Pardon me? Jesse Ryan.
Okay.
I mentioned him earlier.
Oh, yes. Okay,
yeah.
it's still Ryan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still Ryan at that point. Usually first sergeants don't come up to the line like that. They're supposed to stay behind and take care of all the typing and paperwork. But anyway, Jesse came up. The cellar became rather crowded with this group of men that were down there, and the company commander suggested maybe I'd be better off if I went upstairs to the ground floor of the building, as well as several others of A Company men. So we proceeded to go upstairs, and the entrance to the house was from the side. The front of the house was a large living room which opened onto the street, and behind the living room was a hallway which the entrance entered into, and over here was a kitchen, and then back of it was another room. And the 4 or 5 men from A Company whom I was with went to the kitchen, which was the middle room here off the entrance, and proceeded to try and get some rest, because they all knew where we were, and if they wanted us, some of the runners and other people who were involved with the headquarters company. The next thing I remember in that location, I'll say, was hearing a tank outside. We were quite certain it wasn't one of our tanks, because they do make a different noise. And it turned out to be a large Tiger. And he was firing down the street, and I believe, I seem to remember, he fired into the living room of the house that we were in. As he was proceeding down the street, he hit the house. I can't remember, or I don't remember, the Germans coming through the door, the front side door, at all. The last thing I recall about the house was that there was a corporal among the 3 or 4 PFCs who were there. And when he heard the Tiger, and we knew that the front house, the building had been shelled, his comment was, "It's time to go." And we went out a window in the kitchen into the alleyway beside the house, between the 2 houses, and proceeded to make our way back towards the river, the Zorn, and the canal. We succeeded in getting back to the canal with much jumping up and down, because periodically the Germans would throw up flares, and then they would rake the whole field back there with machine gun fire. And we quickly realized that the most opportune time to get away or get through this machine gun fire was as soon as the flare went out, they stopped firing. So at that point, then we proceeded to move on and got back to the, we ended with the 4 or 5 did get back to the river. And there we found one of the officers, Captain Ebbage? Can't remember which one of the officers it was. I think it was Ebbage. And one of our officers, and maybe half a dozen men. Maybe there may have been more. In some kind of a defense line along the river on the German side. We were on, there was a sort of a dike there, and we could lie there and shoot, aim our rifles at the town. It looked like we were, menacing, but we were hardly very menacing at that point. Dawn came. The Germans did not make an effort to push further into, out of the town. They seemed to be mopping up the town and getting whom they could find there. Later in the day, I can't remember if it was before noon or around noon, we were in contact by radio. Maybe 1 or 2 of the radios still worked. We were advised that the artillery was going to fire smoke, and that some of our vehicles would come up under the smoke screen and pick us up and take us back to Weyerstein. And that's what happened. The smoke was fired. Those of us who were back there at that point were able to get onto the vehicles and move back to Weyerstein. I'm sure you know there were 3 or 4 groups that were still in Weyerstein and came out later and were there for a while. At that point, this is a crazy thing to remember, but when we got back, the mess sergeant was there with a hot meal, and the thing I remember most was he had fresh oranges. And why an orange would make a 55-year impression on me, I don't know, but his comment was, "Is this all there are?" Because there were only about 15 or 12 or 15 of us that came out at that time. And he had cooked for a company, expecting a company to come back, and there was no company to come back. We then spent the night at Weyerstein, and I think the next morning we're told we were going to make another attack. Well, whom did we have to attack with but these 15 or 20 men who'd come out, and the cooks and the bakers and the company clerk and the armorer and a few other, I won't call them non-combatants, but certainly not, we did mount up. I remember the cooks being on the 50 caliber machine guns at the in the half tracks. I was more afraid of them at that point than I was of the Germans, frankly, because they didn't know how to handle a 50 caliber machine gun. Fortunately, the order was rescinded, and we did not make another attack. We then were pulled further back, and we relieved by the 36th Division, I think, relieved us, and we went back. Received a lot of replacements, obviously, because of a new company commander, and new officers, and everything. And then proceeded to wait for our next orders, which were to go to Colmar. So,
Was it, how was the morale after Hillsong?
I think we were so exhausted we didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
But those who had been in it,
yeah,
were so tired and so exhausted. And I think it took a while for it to register, just what had happened. I think we were optimistically hopeful that many of them had been captured, as was the case. There were. When I went back in, let's see, down in Colmar. It was middle of February when I went. As I told you, I went back. They were trying to determine where the front line had been, and because I had been in the company headquarters and knew more about where people were supposed to be, they weren't necessarily where they were supposed to be, but anyway, I was taken back to, invited to go back to the party. We realized, I think then, at that point, that not many had been killed that we could find. There weren't that many. The grave registration had found. And we really didn't know. We were just hopefully optimistic that many of them had been captured and marched out, but we only found the 4 or 5 bodies out in the field, as I mentioned. And I guess I can't really tell you any more than that at that point. It was I think this experience numbed us, I'll say that. And even to today, my reading about it and so forth, I'm still not over it, let me say that. It still affects me. When I think back to the night in the kitchen with hearing people dying all around me and not being able to help them, number one, I have constantly had a guilt complex that I did not make some effort to help the CP, because there were windows in that basement that we could have gone to if we'd thought about it and gotten maybe some of those men out. I talked to my company commander, who was one of the men who was captured down there, and told him how I felt. And he said, no way, we could not have gotten out. He doubted. I don't doubt. I think we could have gotten some out. I think he was just trying to soothe my conscience that we didn't do it. But I don't think at the moment, I don't think at the time it happened, I don't think we realized there were windows there. That was our problem. I only realized there were windows there when I went back and saw the building itself. And then I realized there was a bank of windows, 2 or 3. Now, they weren't very large windows. They were about that wide and about that high. But I'm still sure some of the men in the basement could have gotten out. And I guess it concerns me that we didn't even try. I mean, we were really more concerned about saving our own skin than someone else's. And looking back on it now, I wish we had done something. Whether we could have done anything or not, I don't know. It's one of those things that you have to live with and hope it was the right decision, because you can't go back and change it. And they did come out alive. It wasn't as if they were killed. They all were captured. They all came back in fairly good condition.
How many, do you have any idea how many were captured at Hillesheim? I don't know that I've ever seen a number. Have you ever
No,
come
I do
across
not.
that?
I do not.
A lot of
I'm
them
sure
are.
it's in one of the manuals or some of the records. Well, later on, if you want me to, I can look at the morning reports and tell you what or the company history and tell you what they recorded as being captured and killed and wounded and so forth.
I could find it, yeah. So y'all pulled away and kind of regrouped, and then was your next orders to head towards Colmar?
The next orders I remember were to go to Colmar, yes, and assist in breaking that attack that was down there. There was an effort, to capture Strasbourg by the Germans. They wanted it by January 30th for Hitler's birthday. I didn't realize until I just finished reading a book called The Other Battle of the Bulge that Strasbourg was a very emotional location for the French, and that de Gaulle was determined that Strasbourg would not fall. And he did everything in his power to convince the Americans to save Strasbourg, which they did, but at a price. And then we went further down into the Vosges and to Colmar. That was relieved. And there was a question of mopping up at that point. That was not, it was a nasty little action, but it wasn't one that really was by any means comparable to what had happened north of Hillesheim, or north of Strasbourg, at Hillesheim. At least not to me it was.
When you got your next orders, when you're in battle, do you just, okay, this is what we're doing next? Or are there things of memories of, I just went through Hillesheim, I don't want to go through that again? Or do you just kind of, you said you kind of have mechanism to kind of not get too close, to kind of distance yourself to...
From individuals.
Yeah, from
Yes.
individuals.
Yes.
Is that, did you have to use that kind of tool to continue in battle after Herleshheim? Or was that the
No.
point, go, hey, I'm going to go beat these guys, we're not going to lose this thing?
No, I'm not that aggressive.
Oh,
number
okay.
one. I'm more passive. And I guess I'm just willing to accept whatever I'm told to do, whatever I'm told to do, really. I determined early on that I was not going to worry about being killed. If I was going to be killed, I'd be killed. That was nothing I could do about it. So therefore, I was not one who was constantly looking for the last bullet or a piece of shrapnel or anything. I did tried to follow orders as best I could and do the job I was assigned to do. And I really don't remember, I may have been, but I don't remember, being so frightened that I was incapacitated at any time. I was constantly able to, I was mobile. And I've seen men, of course I saw men who were sitting beside the road crying and totally immobilized. They were in shock, total shock. Fortunately, that did not happen to me, even though I think I saw as much or maybe worse than they did. Something in my background kept me going. I'll say that. You know.
You were with headquarters doing
Company
that.
headquarters.
Company headquarters, reading maps, taking care of that. So that was basically your assignment to do that, or did that change as the war?
No, the whole war, the whole period of combat, let me say. It was my responsibility to be sure that when the orders to go somewhere came down, I located the proper routes to be used, that I prepared overlays for each of the platoon commanders so they knew where we were going, and in some cases led the column to where we were going.
Okay.
With the company commander, I'll say. We both rode in the same Jeep. That was
And
not
what kind
exactly-
of weapons did you carry on you all the time? Did you always carry the...
As fast as I could, and as soon as I could, I threw away my M1 and got a carbine. M1s are extremely heavy and I think very difficult to fire. Carbines are much easier to fire. They have a more rapid fire and more bullets in them. And I determined I was not going to run around with an M1 on my back all the time. That if I could get a carbine, and I did get a carbine. And it was much lighter to carry. And that was I never fired, I'll believe it or not, I don't recall ever firing my weapon.
Wow. That's nice that you didn't have to, isn't it?
Well, I think it might have helped my conscience. Because there was always a nagging thought in the back of my mind, since my mother's family came from Germany, and undoubtedly there were family members in the German army, was I killing one of my family members?
Boy, that's tough.
And I never, I never knew, I would never know, obviously,
Yeah.
But when you're facing a group of Germans, you never, you just don't know who they are. But I think probably a lot of people who had come from German background probably had the same feeling. I don't think I was alone in that. I think that would be, at least in my mind, that would be a normal reaction at this point.
Hey, tell me about getting everyone to Colmar and how that action fit together, and did it go successfully? Did everybody, were they where they were supposed to be? And since you're the map person, you knew exactly where they were supposed to be.
I knew where they were supposed.
I want to ask you, did it ever get frustrating that you told people to go where they were supposed to go, and you found out they didn't go where they were supposed to? Or was it just easy to say, I told you,
I don't recall ever having the former matter problem, that I told you to go somewhere and you didn't go there. That wasn't the problem. The problem I had primarily was, first of all, being able to determine whether the roads were sufficiently capable of carrying an armored division. And the reason I say that was because at one point at the time we were assigned to Patton before Herlesheim, our Herlesheim. We had been assigned to Patton to help cover his flank as he went up to the Bulge. And we were moving up toward Trier, and the maps I used, showed that there was a cutoff and a bridge across a river that would shorten our time tremendously, and we would get there more quickly. I therefore led the column to that particular location, only to find out this was a footbridge. It was not a bridge that would take the tanks or the half-tracks. And it's a very tricky process on a one-lane road, turning around an armored column. And I was not anybody's favorite at that point in time at all, because we had to go back and turn around maybe about 30 or 40 vehicles who had followed us down there, obviously. Later on, there were times when the column got split. It's not easy to follow the cat eyes from the rear of a vehicle if you don't stay close together. But that was a later episode. We had pretty good success in getting where we were supposed to go. At least in my estimation, we did. And I don't, except for that one or two times when the column got split. Later on, when we were in such what I'll call a race across Germany in March and April, that we had too much difficulty with that. I had taken, when we were in France at the chateau, I had taken a group from the platoons, one or two men from each of the platoons, and tried to teach them something in map reading. And they were the ones whom I sent these overlays to, and they were the ones who assisted them. I assume assisted the platoon commanders, if they were still there. I don't know if they were there anymore at the time. Time some of these things happened, but I don't recall much confusion, let me say, at that point. We got down where we were supposed to go. We might have delayed a little bit, but all the delays were not our problem, not our reason, because of lack of navigational expertise, I'll say. We got there.
Okay. I think I got us off for Colmar. Let's get
Yes, we were in Colmar. Yes, that's correct. I remember we went to Colmar. We arrived at Colmar, the city, and then we had to go further south. And the Vosges, the mountains were on our right, and I guess the Rhine was on our left. I didn't see the Rhine, but I assume from the maps I saw that the Rhine was there. We had some firefights, I'll call them, cleaning out some of the towns. But we pretty well were able to clean them out. I think we met another armored division down there, too. I'm trying to remember. Wasn't there another armored division that came in from the east? Or from the west? Or maybe in the French, I don't know. I know we had to meet. So we met up with someone down there. The pocket got cleaned out, and then we went back north again. Because by that time, I think Remagen had been seized, and my next major remembrance, early in March, was crossing the Rhine at somewhere in the vicinity of Worms on a pontoon bridge. Sure.
Is that a weird experience? Or is it sort of just like going on a swinging bridge that's in the water?
Well, by that time, having been in the Army, for almost 3 years and 2 or 3 months of combat, nothing was really weird, I guess, at that point. We drove across the Rhine. No one was firing at us. We had no problems getting across the Rhine, and proceeded to go into an attack position and start what became our rat race almost across Germany, because we did not encounter, I would say, any significant, now please understand the term significant, opposition. Now, we were in the south of Germany, remember, and I think more of the opposition was in the north. There had been more opposition. But down in Bavaria, where we were, oh sure, we had firefights, and we may have been held up a day or two going through, but it was nothing like waiting a week or spending a great deal of time. In fact, armored divisions are not used for siege divisions. They're used for mobile firefighting, and your orders generally were go as far as you can, as fast as you can. And I'm sure you know that the Company A holds the record for having moved the furthest, the fastest in Europe for an armored division.
Was it very difficult to keep supplies and gas and everything to y'all?
Having the foggiest idea.
Okay.
We had it. That was all I can say. I don't recall ever not having what we needed.
Did you have much? Was there very little light opposition as you went through those?
Some of them were heavy. Some were heavier. There was April 1st, for example, was a significant day. It was Easter Sunday, and I recall that year in 1945, and I remember that we drove into a town called Koningshaven, and there we did receive some very significant fighting, significant fire from the Germans, and I think we were held up there a day or two before we finally moved on. But otherwise, it was a matter of driving in or sending in recon and pretty well moving as fast as you can, as quickly as you can. Now, I'm sure there are others who disagree with me, but that's, because they were the ones who were fighting it. I was generally sitting in the half-track or sitting in the Jeep waiting for them to clean things up. But I'm saying that, I don't remember anything like the Herlesheim situation never occurring again. And things were so mobile.
Tell me about, as you were coming, y'all went the 52, what date was this?
Oh, gee, I don't remember.
Okay,
I think it was in April.
March?
I bet it was in April.
April?
I think it was probably in April.
So it was in April. And so, okay, then tell me about when you found, where you were and what you heard and how you heard that it was VE Day.
What? Oh, VE Day. Okay. That was about May 5th, I believe, May 4th, May 5th. The company, A company, was in the valley of the Inn River, pushing down towards Innsbruck. The Germans were on the cliffs and the crags overlooking the area where we were driving down. The road, the river was here and the road was right here beside it, and there was no room for maneuvering of any kind. You just drove down the road. Several times we found the road had been blown, and we had to stop and fill it in before we could continue on down. At those particular times, then the Germans who were on the cliffs above us would throw grenades down, or they'd fire on us, or do something to make life uncomfortable for us anyway. And that's the area I was in. I don't remember the exact location, but that's the area we were in when we heard the war had been finalized, was finished. And we then stopped, of course, and then we drew back, and I guess we went to Augsburg. I think that was, I don't remember where we finally ended up, but that was...
Was there big celebrations, or were y'all just tired?
We were exhausted. We were just so happy to be able to sleep at night and not have to worry about being shot at. Of course, that was not necessarily so, because there was certainly some pockets of resistance that could cause some problems. But we had taken so many prisoners, and we had done. It was so. You're just physically exhausted now. Admittedly, we were only in 6 months. In combat, it's about 6 months. I can't imagine how the men must have felt who were in 2 or 3 years, constantly, because you may be pulled back for a week or two, but that's not enough to bring you back to full fighting spirit and everything. I guess we're considered to have been in the line the whole 6 months. I know we had a few days we were off, but that's just not that far back. And one, I think, is so relieved in one sense that you're not going to have to make another attack, because attacks were always dangerous for your health. And also, you didn't have to look out for snipers, and you didn't have to look out for, well, you didn't have to look out for mines, because many times mines weren't removed, hadn't been removed, and they could be tricky. There was still the danger that there were some diehards around who were going to snipe at you or something like that. But we were fortunate that didn't happen, at least not to me anyway. We went back into what do I want to say, occupation duty for a while. I went from Company A up to battalion headquarters as the men were pulled off with points and everything. Like consolidations were made and personnel changed. There weren't many. One time I left the battalion, there weren't many still there that I knew.
How long did you stay? What month did you come back home?
I left Marseille in December of 1945.
You were there quite a while.
Yeah, I was in occupation from May till December. I didn't have that many points because I didn't have that much combat, for one thing. And I guess the only significant thing that happened at that period of time was that I was offered an opportunity to go to England to school, either Cambridge or Oxford. And I accepted it, and I was scheduled to go in October for a year, college year. And I think it was the day before I was to leave, I received a letter from my mother saying that father was not well and would I please come home as quickly as I could. So I immediately changed all my plans then and did not go to Oxford. However, by the time I got home, it was February, because I couldn't get home that quickly. And father was fine by then, and I guess I have one regret. What I'm saying is I have one regret that I did not take that year at Oxford anyway, because it didn't make any difference. Wouldn't have made one difference one or the other, and it ended up. But initially, the letter sounded rather desperate and get me home, get home as fast as I could.
Were you involved in any way with the concentration camp?
No, I was not. I didn't see any. I didn't want to see any, and I have not gone to see any. We went back to, my wife and I went back to Europe in 1990, ostensibly to the Oberammergau play. But we also had 2 more weeks, which we toured through Munich and southern Bavaria and everything. And one of the opportunities we had was to go to Dachau. And I did not want to go to Dachau. I did not want to go to the Holocaust Museum. I know it happened. I see nothing to be gained by my having it all brought back to my attention. And I'm sorry, but I'm saying I'm just putting it in the back of my mind.
Well, you've seen enough.
And I've seen enough of this. Well, I had not seen any of the people from Dachau, from the.
But you have experienced
I'd read about
war.
it enough, and I'd, as you said, experienced war, and I saw dead bodies and dead animals and everything. And, I know there were a number of people who went to the Holocaust Museum here, and it was just nothing that appealed to me. Let me put it that way. At this point.
Is there anything that I have left uncovered that I should have that you feel like I should have asked you about your experience, or something
Not really.
I've left?
Not really.
Okay. As you look at World War II and your experiences there, are there some things that, some lessons you've learned that you've used through your life, or some lessons that you share with other people because of what you went through?
Well, I guess one of the major lessons I learned was that you never give an order if you can't see it fulfilled or obeyed. I remember that was quite clearly drilled into us. To be sure that if you did give someone an order, it could be completed. You did not want insubordination. You had to be sure that what you wanted done could be done. Don't give an order that can't be consummated. I had lived a very, I guess you would call it, sheltered life as far as being around a diverse group of men. The high school I went to was in a small town. The friends I had were all my own economic group, they were all my social group and everything. And of course, going into the Army, I was exposed to a lot of different cultures, backgrounds, and so forth. And I guess one thing the Army did teach me was tolerance, that you have to get along. And I don't want to say live and let live, but essentially it's that kind of philosophy. I have characterized my Army life in that period as a period I would never want to give up, but I would never want to relive it again, if that makes sense.
What has the association meant to you?
It has meant the opportunity to maintain contact with the men whom I served with during the war, and to maintain that contact through these past 50 years. I usually only see them once a year at these things. My wife doesn't understand this at all. She's totally, I won't say unsympathetic, but there have been several reunions she has not come to because she doesn't enjoy this kind of thing. And I will say the whole tenor of the reunions have changed dramatically in the last, well, since the early ones in the 40s and 50s, when there was a lot more drinking, there was a lot more staying up until 4 o'clock in the morning, a lot more of this kind of reliving the whole thing on a more intimate level. I think as we've grown older, I won't say we've matured, I'll say we grew older, we realized that, first of all, our bodies can't take it. I've got to be in bed by 11 or 11:30. I can't stay up at 4 o'clock in the morning drinking beer or cocktails anymore, or smoking or anything like that. My wife took very strong objection to the drinking and smoking things that were going on at the CP. Nothing immoral or anything. It's just that that's not the kind of thing she appreciated. And she said, I don't see how you can go and rehash that year after year after year, the same thing over and over and over. And I said, well, it's just a male thing. I think you've got to accept it. That's all. And we have not made all the reunions, and I have not made an effort to. In the earlier ones, it was more difficult because of financing and so forth. But as I grew older and things loosened up financially and everything, I've made quite a few of them now. I didn't make the one in St. Louis because I was just recovering from a double bypass operation. My doctors refused to let me come. I was ready to come. I would have come, but they thought 2 weeks after the operation was a little close to my coming out to St. Louis and being out from under their care. So they refused to let me come. But I certainly, look forward to this one.
Yeah. When were you discharged, and where did you get discharged from?
Where and when? Okay. I left Marseille in either late December or early January. I don't remember. 45. I came over on a Liberty ship, back on a Liberty ship, that landed in Maryland at one of the ports of Bethlehem Steel, shipbuilding company. And I was, first of all, taken to Fort Meade by train, as I remember. I then either came by train or bus, I don't recall which, to Indiantown Gap, Fort Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania, which was very close to where I lived. I lived in Allentown at the time. My parents did anyway. And I was processed there for about 3 or 4 days. Finally, one day, I called my father and said, come and get me. And he came and got me. That was it. I walked out.
When did you meet your wife? You didn't meet her before the war, did you?
Oh, no, I did not, no. I went back, I got discharged in January, and in March I was back at college.
Oh.
And let me see, that was 46. The winter of 46, 47, I had a tobogganing accident, and I jammed the cartilage in my right knee, and I had to go to the hospital for an operation. And she was a student nurse at the hospital at the time. And that was how I met her. And then I told her when I left that I would call her to come, ask her to come to one of the dances at college when I could dance. And she's told me since then, she said, ha, 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 I'll never see him again. But she did see me again. She did hear from me again. And we did continue then during my senior year to go to dances and date and so forth. And then in 49, I graduated in May of 48, June of 48, May of 48. And then in May of 49, we were married.
And what has your career been?
My career, okay. After I graduated from college, I went to work as the accountant for an ice cream company that had a branch up in Allentown, so it was in the county type program. I then went to RCA in one of their branches. They operated an organization called the RCA Service Company, and it branches all the United States servicing RCA equipment. And I was branch chief clerk for 3 of their different branches, Allentown, Wilkes-Barre, and Camden. I then left in 1960, 59, 60, I left RCA, and I went to work for the Lutheran Church in America at their national headquarters at 231 Madison Avenue in New York. I worked in New York for 4 years, and in 1964, 65, I can't remember which, I determined that I was not particularly thrilled going to New York every day. And my wife was complaining that I'd come home and my collars were all dirty and it was difficult to keep everything clean. So I secured a job in Lancaster, Pennsylvania as the business manager for one of our social service agencies, which was in the process of building a nursing home and expanding. I stayed with them until 1969 when I became the chief financial officer for a major hospital in Philadelphia, operated by the University of Pennsylvania. In 74, they thought I had a heart attack. And at that point, I sort of went into semi-retirement for a year or two. In 76, it was necessary that nursing home administrators become licensed. The federal government demanded this. And a series of courses had to be set up. I became involved with Elizabethtown College in teaching financing, nursing home finance, healthcare finance, in these courses that the college was giving. And from there, I was invited by any number of the administrators to come and do work for them and consult with them and so forth. And by 1980, I had set up my own consulting business to nursing homes, particularly in the area of reimbursement, both Medicare and Medicaid. And that's where I've been ever since.
So you're still working?
If you want to call it that.
Well,
yes, I still do the reports, but I'm only down to about 2 or 3 clients now. I'm not the 40-hour week or anything.
Okay. Well, I sure appreciate you coming and sharing with us. I appreciate it, and
I don't know if I've given you any insights you haven't had already or not.
Yeah,
but,
yes, you have. You have. It's really neat to talk to different people, because I have not talked to anybody that was like with Captain Hilton, or I mean, basically who I've talked to are the guys that were out there.
Out in the field.
Out in the field.
The platoon people.
The platoon people. So I'm glad to get a different view of it. But thanks.
You're welcome.
Very much.